In this video, we're going to answer the question to how do I make a flat list out of a list of lists in Python. So this is fairly easy to do, and I'm going to put a big if here. You have a simple structure like a list of sublists, but no deep listing. No deep nesting. You don't have lists with lists with lists with some more lists in them. It's just a simple. So we're going to start with list of lists. We're going to have 3 sublists of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're going to vary the amount in them so that, we're not depending on it being the same length for each one, all the way up to 12. Now, this is a very, very Pythonic way of doing it. You're going to build a nested for loop. And the outer nest starts first. And it's going to go here and it's going to say for sublist in your list of lists. And then you're going to go for item in sublist. At the very end, you're chunking out item. And when you print that, sure enough, you get a flat list with all the items. Now, this is the equivalent of how I would do this in another language, which is you would just build a nested list loop here where for, and then you create another block, and then at the end you append on there. And if you're doing it this way, it's going to come across as you're not very experienced in Python. So I would get comfortable doing this list iterator up here where you're building it in these square brackets, and you can even go 2, 3 deep there without it being confusing, and it would look normal to someone who does Python programming all the time. Okay, so now, what if you wanted to level up to get to that next level here? Well, we're going to use something called chain from itertools. And itertools is kind of full of things that you would use to iterate. So the clue is in the library name. And what chain does is you can give it more than one list, and it will treat it as if it's a single list and just keep blowing and going from one list to the next list to the next list, which sounds exactly what we're trying to do here. And so here, I'm going to use list, which turns it back into a list, and you're going to chain, and this is the expansion, which says, expand out that list of lists so that I get each sublist as an argument being passed into chain. And then that gives me my flat list. And when I print it, sure enough, it does the exact same thing. But, it looks a little more like the libraries here. All right, now we're going to get into something to where, what if it's not just a straight list, but you could have an arbitrary number of sublists. And so I wrote this little function called create monster because these really are kind of monstrosities. And in it, I'm going to create a nested list with X, nesting depth here. And so if I do a depth of 10, then it gives me this, 10 nested deep list here. Now, we can take that, and if you try to use the upper solutions, they won't work. They need the list to be only one layer deep. Now we're going to bring out the big gun, recursion. So this is something that if you took programming in college, they would have discussed extensively. If you're self-taught like me, this is something that when you finally ran across the first time, you just went, but once you get used to it, it feels very normal. And what recursion means is the function can call itself. So it can go down and down and down and down. And that's just what we need because we're looking for the individual items within all these nested lists. So we have out, which is what each level is going to return. And it looks at every item in the list. And first of all, it says, is this item a list or a tuple? Because if it is, I need to unpack it. I need to pull it out. And so how I'm going to do that is I'm going to extend, which puts multiple things in a list, into out by calling myself recursively with that sub-item. Otherwise, hey, it's just a single thing. I'm just going to append it on the end of there. And then when I get done, I'm going to return everything I've gotten either to the layer up or to the thing that called me. And sure enough, when we call this, it works brilliantly. Now, there is a little caveat here, which is your computer can only go so deep before it says, hey, I think we're in an endless loop here, or an endless recursion. I need to bail out before this guy chews up all the memory. And so I created a monster Godzilla nested list, and it is 2,971 levels deep. And sure enough, my recursion can handle that. But it took me a little while to figure out the right number. At 2,972, Python calls it quits. It says, heck no, I'm getting out of here. And if you roll down here, it's the maximum recursion depth is exceeded. So they're trying to protect you from yourself, but you can't use this for arbitrarily deep. But I haven't run in a case where I would have that many levels of recursion anyway. Now, last thing we want to cover here is, hey, let me show you how to show off. And we're going to use a functional style. Now, functional is another one of those things that you would have picked up in a professional degree, but it's everywhere now. Almost every language has some sort of functional style. And at the bottom level, functional style means that you are passing functions in to other functions to tell them how to do what they're supposed to do. So right here, we have a library that I wasn't too familiar with until recently. It's the operator library. And it gives you different operators like add, subtract, divide, and in this case, concat. Now, why would you need a library for that? Well, you can't pass in the plus operator, the plus sign, because Python only knows it's the add operator if it's in between two numbers. And if you just pass in plus, it doesn't really know what it is. So you have to import your operation from the operator library. Now, they have another library, func tools, which are functional tools. So this is where Python put all the functional type libraries that you can access and use, so you too can be a cool functional programmer. So we're going to get reduce. Now what reduce does is it goes through every item in a list and it applies the operator that you passed in to the new one and the previous one. So you start by passing in the initial state. So here we're going to pass in an empty list. We're going to get the list of list. And then for every item in the list of list, we're going to concatenate it with the previous one. And so sure enough, you can see empty list passes in 1, 2, 3. It concatenates it. 1, 2, 3. Goes to the next one. Now we've got 5, 6, 7. It concatenates it all the way to the end. So this is a cool kid functional style way of doing it. But it can't handle complex structures, so you got to be careful because when you pass in our little small monster, it goes, whoop, can't do that because some of that stuff doesn't make sense to me. All right, that's it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please hit subscribe. Please hit the like button. They both help me build an audience here. Looking forward to seeing you in the next video.